All right, all right. Hello, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get kicked off. I am Lonnie Hobbs Jr., Marketing Research Director for Kansas Black Farmers Association. I want to thank you for joining us today. You are in for a treat. We have Ms. Brandi Miller with us from the Kansas Cooperative Council, and she'll be discussing today what is cooperatives and what are some ways that we can utilize this or integrate this into KBFA. So this is a webinar style event, meaning all of the chat, just to monitor and make sure we don't have any hackers or anything. All of the chat, I believe you can send your messages to me as the host, and then from there, I'll ask any type of questions that you would like asked. Also, if you have any information that you want to share with the group, just send it to me in the chat and I will be sure to share it with everyone in the group as well. Also, just to make sure, it will not allow you to unmute yourself. So myself as the host to control it, I will be sure to, if there are any questions or anything, like I said, I'll be monitoring. Just send your questions to me in the chat and we will go from there. But without further ado, before we bring up Brandi, I'm going to bring up our Program Director, Mr. Justin Howard, to bring greetings. And then from there, we will switch it over to Brandi and we'll get going.
Good morning, everyone. I'm totally excited to not only kind of host this event today, but also to learn. I know that we went to the meeting in Wichita back in the winter, and there was so much to gather at that. We wanted to bring Brandi back and get some more information. We were kind of like with our mouths open in a fire hydrant, to kind of put it to an analogy. So there's a lot to be gleaned here today, and I hope that everyone is able to get something that they can use, and hopefully, there's some efforts that we can do together. But today I just want everyone to basically be a sponge and soak up as much as you can, and be thinking of how we can use that together as a group. So again, I'm excited, and I want to give a thanks to Brandi for being flexible with us and being willing to spread some of her wealth with us, her knowledge. And I would also like to welcome everyone else. I see people still popping in. I'm glad to see the faces that I see, and hopefully, we can put our minds together again and try to move forward together collectively. So without any more of me talking, I'm going to pass it over to Brandi. And thank you, Lonnie, for hosting this and putting this together for us. And your MC skills are impeccable, brother.
Well, thank you all so much. Good morning. I'm excited to get to spend a little bit of time with you. Just confirming I have an hour. Is that correct? Okay, perfect. I have a lot of slides. So if we don't get through them, I'm happy to come back. I will send the slide deck to Lonnie and Justin both so you can have access to it. Really want to thank them for reaching out, and it was exciting to see interest at our Director Development Program in December. Dr. John L. Holmes really was kind of the catalyst for all of this, and I apologize that I didn't get a chance to visit with folks more, but that is really like it's almost like a wedding every December that I get to go through, because I have to, I have to do all the things with all the people. So anyway, without any further ado, I would like to go ahead and share my screen. And basically I want this to be pretty informal. So as you have questions that come up, please don't hesitate to use the chat and reach out to Lonnie, and even later after we're done, if things come up, I want to be a resource for you. I'm excited about your interest. What I wanted to do this morning a little bit differently than what I did for folks that did come to Director Development. I want to start with, how do you even get started? So you've got an interest in the cooperative space. So what does that even look like? So I'm actually going to share, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger here on my. So what you see is, this is actually the 2023-24 legislative session website for the Kansas legislature. And the reason why I wanted to start here is because when you're thinking about forming a cooperative, this is really the place where you would start. So Lonnie, if you don't mind scrolling down, and we're actually going to go into Article 16, which is the Cooperative Marketing Act. And this is the actual statute that governs cooperatives. And so if you click on the purpose of a Cooperative Marketing Act, you can see really the reason why this act was instituted was to allow producers to come together to market products collectively and cooperatively. And so if you just hit next, gives a definition of cooperatives. It talks through patronage and what that is, which I will get into that as well, association and member. And then if you hit next again, I'm going to try to do this with you. Okay, so now we're at 1603, which is incorporation. So as you think about the future, especially if you'd like to form a cooperative, you really need to, first of all, I would encourage getting an attorney. That's probably the best first step. But if you want to organize as a cooperative, this is where you would want to look at what do you need to get started. And so under the Cooperative Marketing Act in the state of Kansas, you just need 5 producers, and you have to be bona fide producers. What that means, it's not been legally defended in a court. And so we don't actually have a legal definition of a bona fide producer, but it allows a little flexibility within the cooperative. And so typically what that looks like at a co-op in Kansas is how much business you do with the co-op determines if you're a bona fide producer. And so as you organize, you could kind of decide on what you wanted that to be, is how much grain you wanted to receive, or how much supply. So if you wanted to sell fertilizer, what that number would need to be, you could determine that at the beginning. But you would start basically with 5 or more folks that were interested in coming together and forming a nonprofit co-op association. And you would have to develop bylaws, you'd have to develop articles of incorporation, and then you would go ahead and just apply to Secretary of State's office and form your cooperative. And so that's really the legal side. And I don't want to spend a ton of time on this because I'm not an attorney and I just can't give you advice on how to proceed in that space. But I do think this is a great resource. And if you guys get to that point, I'm happy to connect you with a couple of attorneys in the state that are very knowledgeable in this space. But then I wanted to jump to my PowerPoint presentation. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So because we do have producers on the call, I do want to just make sure that I'm doing my due diligence and covering our antitrust policy. We will not be setting prices today on this webinar. So this is the Co-op Council's antitrust policy, and we provide this at almost all of our training, but especially training where we have producers involved. So we talked about how do we get started. We covered those statutes. I do want to cover a little bit about who we are as an association and our role in space. And then I'll talk about the history, and then I'll really get into what a co-op is from a business perspective. So we are a almost 80-year-old trade association, and we really operate on behalf of all cooperatively structured businesses in the state of Kansas. We do have co-ops located outside of Kansas that have locations in the state. So we do work in Nebraska and Missouri, Oklahoma, and Colorado. So all 4 states around us, we actually have member locations in. What makes us a little bit more unique compared to my peers is that we are the only organization that pulls it all together from an umbrella perspective. I have peers in several states around Kansas, but their focus is really in the ag space. And so the value for us is that we can come as a cooperative business and advocate really on behalf of the business as a whole, the business structure as a whole, opposed to just one sector within the business. So I love to touch a little bit about the history of cooperatives. They actually started in England in 1844. It was set by a group of folks that were weavers, they were having a hard time purchasing quality products. And so individually, they would go and try to purchase products, and they would purchase dry milk, for example, powdered milk, and then there would be sawdust in it and it wouldn't be good quality. And so what they decided to do is to come together cooperatively and start a business where they could pool their resources and purchase products and then sell products to consumers of better quality. They also are recognized for establishing the first set of cooperative principles, and we still lean on those principles today when we think about doing business cooperatively. So what is a co-op? Well, it's a business structure. I mean, that's really truly what it is. It's determined by who owns it, who controls it, who uses it, and who gets the profits or earnings from it. That is probably a very simplistic view of what a co-op is, but truly that is really what defines any business is these four pieces here. So when you think about different types of businesses, you think about individually owned businesses or partnerships, corporations. Co-ops, actually, talking about ag co-ops now, they fall under corporations. That's where their tax structure falls, even though there's some unique opportunities that are available to co-ops in the tax space. This is really where they're organized underneath. So what is a co-op? It's a business that is owned and controlled by the people that use it. And so I want to touch on these user principles. This is just kind of a boring definition, but I really think this kind of gets into the crux of what that means. So there's three user principles that we look to when we think about what a co-op is. And the first is the owner principle. And that is the people who own and finance the cooperative are those people that use it. And so in the farmer space, it would be producers that own, they financially contribute, and whether that looks like stock at the very beginning, and doing business as it's established are the ones who use it. The next principle is the control principle. So those same individuals that own and finance the co-op are the ones who control this. And this is done by utilizing a board structure. And I will dig a lot deeper into that here in just a few minutes. And then the benefit principle. And so what makes the co-op structure the most unique is really this benefit principle. The sole purpose is to provide and distribute benefits back to the members based on use. So I'll dig a little bit deeper into that as well. But the way you can think about this is if you participate in any cooperative today, I use REI because we're seeing REIs in Kansas. There's one in Wichita and one in Johnson County, Overland Park. It's the largest consumer cooperative in the United States. And we like to do stuff outdoors. We also obviously kind of have, I love the co-op model. I rep the brand, if you will. And so we'd like to go and shop at REI, and then every year we get our dividends back based on how much money we spent at REI. And that's how co-ops are structured as well. So the more business you do with a co-op, the more return on your investment. And that's very unique when you think about how other businesses are structured, because you don't find that in other businesses. I really wish that I love to shop at Target, and I wish the Target would give me the same amount of return on my investment as the amount of money I spend there, but that's not how that works. And I also don't have any control as well in regards to what products are available at Target. So this is the crux, these user principles of what really sets the co-op apart from other business structures. So digging in a little bit deeper, let's talk about this user control. So the way this works is you have a board that is structured to support the cooperative, and those individuals that run the board are voted in at an annual meeting or membership meeting by the other members that own the co-op. So as a user, you get to elect or you get to participate in and be a member of the board, and then you ultimately are making decisions on major cooperative issues, how to handle financial decisions. The board is the governing body that determines how much money goes back to members at the end of the year. And so this user control is really what defines sets co-ops apart from other private businesses. So I work really closely with Kansas State University, specifically the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center. So you'll see some of, it's Dr. Brian Brigham's slides dropped in here because he and we work together and share information all the time. And I thought this was a good slide to share with you. So what makes cooperative finance unique? And I covered the high levels of the governance, and I'll dig a little bit deeper, like I said, but how about the finance piece? And this I probably couldn't spend as much time as Brian, but I could spend some time really covering what makes the cooperative finance components unique. But when you think about a co-op that's doing business in an area and they generate income, that's when the co-op finance begins to differ from a standard investor owned or independently owned or even family owned firm approach. So when a co-op has a successful year and they have capital at the end of the year, then the board gets to determine what to do with that. And that is called patronage income. So that those funds that are left over are called patronage. And patronage is member-based profits that are distributed back to members based on use. And so it can look like lots of different things. It's always measured in units. It's, in the production ag space, it's usually cents per bushel or maybe dollars per ton. If it's related to some sort of fertilizer application, it might be a different unit. But it's really an incentive to do business with your local co-op. So if a co-op is profitable and there's more member business that's conducted with a co-op, then there's more profits that are actually coming back into the co-op and ultimately back to the producer. And this gets a little sticky and has in the past because a lot of times you're thinking about as a business, as a producer, you're thinking about your business. How can you do what's best for your business today? And so some co-ops have reacted to that, where in lieu of giving patronage, you can just take a reduction in cost, or you can get it maybe another cent per bushel or something if you're taking grain. And so you get that cash up front. But the benefit of leaning a little bit more heavily on patronage and waiting until the end of the year is that you're allowing the co-op to use economy of scale to really deliver that benefit back to all of the members. And so if you take that discount at the front end, or that benefit at the front end, then you aren't allowing the co-op to really utilize the economy of scale for benefit for everyone. So there's different types of patronage. And again, this tends to get a little bit complicated if you're not familiar with this process. And so happy to come back again and share more information, or even have Brian come and talk a little bit more about this. But when we think about patronage, there's really three types of patronage that we talk about. We talk about cash patronage, which is truly just like you think it is. It's usually a check that comes at annual meeting. And so the board says, we made this much money and we're going to give this much back as cash. Then we have allocated equity. And so this is retained patronage. And the way to think about this is your equity in the business. So you will get this back at some point. And so you are basically allowing the co-op to use this money on behalf of you for whatever value that the co-op can provide. And so something that we see allocated equity used for is more space. So maybe you need to build a bin, or maybe it's for some sort of other capital project. The speed, you need a faster leg so that you can bring in more trucks, or that's typically where we see allocated equity. And then unallocated equity is retained earnings. And so that in Kansas, we don't see a lot of boards utilizing member funds as unallocated equity. There are co-ops in the US that do. They turn everything into unallocated equity, so no one's name is attached to it. But sometimes where you see more unallocated equity, at least in Kansas, is from non-member business. And so if you have a co-op in your area that has a gas station, for example, and then you would have a lot of non-member business that comes in and fuels their vehicles. And so that might fall into that unallocated equity bucket. Or if you're doing business with other cooperatives, so there's regional cooperatives that provide equity back to the co-op based on the amount of business they do. It's patronage, but it sometimes is also considered unallocated equity. And so co-ops then have, it's not attached to a member's name. So I'm going to stop real quick and see if there's any questions that have come in about the types of patronage.
I don't believe there's any questions as of now, Brandi. None in
Okay.
the chat.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to keep plugging away then. So the next thing that makes a cooperative structure unique is single taxation. So this is the business relationship between a producer and a co-op. So as a member, farmers own the co-op. So the co-op is actually part of a farm's enterprise investment mix. You could consider it similar to farmland, trucks, tractors. I don't see a lot of banks utilizing or farm credit or credit unions using the co-op as equity, but from a tax perspective, because of that relationship, the profits generated by the co-op are only taxed one time. So single taxation. So this is also a unique benefit that producers receive when becoming a member of a co-op. So when co-op profits are generated, they are either taxed at the farm level or the cooperative level. And who pays the tax is basically determined by the board of directors. And the reason why this is important is because we have seen, based on the economy over the last 15, 20 years, and even before then, honestly, but we see tax rates change. And so this is just another tool in the toolbox for cooperatives to really utilize what's happening in the marketplace to best benefit producers. So if the tax rate is more favorable for the co-op to carry, then the co-op, if it's lower basically, then the co-op could pay the tax on any profit that's generated and not pass that tax burden down to producers. Or it could go the other direction, where if the taxation is more if the tax rate is lower for producers to carry that tax burden, then the co-op can then just push that burden down, but they can offset the amount of money that comes to the producer. So it gets a little sticky. Fortunately, there's several firms in Kansas that do nothing but focus on ag, the ag accounting, and they usually, as a co-ops have to be audited annually. That's a requirement for transparency. And because of their knowledge in this space, they are able to meet with boards of directors and discuss, okay, let's take a look at how well you did as a business and where it makes the most sense to manage the tax burden. But since it's single taxation, it only has to be paid once. So cooperative profits and patronage distributions are only taxed at one time, that's a great benefit and value that cooperatives are able to provide for producers. So I mentioned, as I'm talking about this patronage, I think it's important to talk about who does this, and this really falls on the shoulders of directors. And so typically the way this process works is annually a co-op will go through an audit, and the auditor will come and meet with the board and provide the results of the audit and say, okay, this looks like how much money the co-op has made for the year. And then the directors get to determine exactly how much money they want to pass back to producers as patronage, how much comes back as cash, if there's going to be allocated or unallocated equity. And then that equity basically has an age to it. And so boards are also responsible for deciding how they want to pay that equity back. I think I put a flow chart in here, but I dropped a few slides in the middle right before we got started. And so if I don't have it, I can pull it up at the end to kind of show a good graphical flow chart of how dollars flow through the co-op and how the boards are utilizing just, based on where the money comes from, how to distribute it back to producers. I put in here, this next slide is actually, it's actually a math problem. I will send this in the deck when I send this to Lonnie and to Justin, but I'm not going to go ahead and cover this because I do think this kind of gets in the weeds a little bit, and I wasn't sure how many folks we would have on here, especially if somebody's going back and watching this later. So this will be in here, and I can drop in how much patronage they would actually receive onto the slide so that people can just see a simple example. So for time, I'm going to skip over these. Oh, here's the income distribution flow chart. It is in here. I think this is probably the easiest way to see how money flows back to producers. So the end of your year, your co-op has a total net income. You have to maintain single taxation, but you determine how much is patronage and how much is non-patronage. How much you want to send back to your members is allocated and unallocated. The tax, if it's qualified versus non-qualified, and then cash patronage versus retained patronage. And then if you have non-patronage dollars that come in, somebody like me that's a non-member and I do business with a co-op, what does this look like? And so you can kind of see the flow down here. And then I have all of the definitions for those things, those different buckets here. And again, this is pretty deep in the woods as far as how you manage this piece of a business. And I think as you guys start to explore utilizing the co-op business model, and this would be something that we could come back to and really spend a lot more time talking about the best way to manage this for your business. What I really wanted to spend time on, though, with you guys was talking more about co-op director responsibility and good governance, especially as you think about the value that you can provide to your to members of Kansas Black Farmers Association. And so that really looks like good governance. So we talk about governance in the way of co-op director responsibility. So I showed you before, you will elect your directors and determine who those folks are. Do you have term limits? Do you want to have some turnover? Do you want to set, no more than 3 3-year terms? That's pretty standard in the industry. How do you want to manage that longevity of a director? But the most important piece of the director responsibility is just strong governance. And so when we think about strong governance, there's really, we love three buckets here, 3 buckets of duty of, how can I say this? It's 3 different areas of focus and they're legal requirements for directors to maintain a strong governance. So the first is really fiduciary duty. So directors have a fiduciary duty to the co-op and also to its shareholders and members to act with the utmost good faith and loyalty and best interests of the co-op. So when you run for a director position, your intention should not be to do what's best for you as a producer, but really what's best for everyone, all of the shareholders, and for the co-op as a whole. This gets a little tricky, I think, because the reason why you're interested and even participate in the organization is because you're a producer, but you really have to take a step back and think about, is this decision what's best for the business as a whole and for all of the shareholders? You also have a duty of care, which is a duty to exercise due diligence and keep yourself informed. And so this looks like reading minutes. This looks like being aware of the financial health of the business, understanding your responsibilities as it relates to being prepared for board meetings, that sort of thing. So that's what the duty of care piece is. And then duty of loyalty. And this really kind of, fiduciary, that focuses more on the financial component, but the duty of loyalty is to act in the best interest of the co-op and ignore your patron status. And the example I like to use when I talk about duty of loyalty is that if you are a producer and you serve on a co-op board and you have a rundown location that's 5 miles from your house, but it's 5 miles from your house, and the co-op is considering closing that location and building a new location that's maybe more centrally located, your duty of loyalty is to act in the best interest of the co-op. And so the best interest would be building this location somewhere that's more centrally located, opposed to this continuing to run this dilapidated location that's closer to you. So that's what duty of loyalty is. And when we do director development, we utilize an attorney to come in and talk about these governance components and what the legal ramifications are if you're not following these. And so I do think directors sometimes forget that they do have some legal responsibilities as it relates to these 3 areas. And it's important that they are acting on the best interest of the co-op. Because if they're not, and something nefarious happens, then ultimately a director could be responsible. They could potentially be responsible for, if you have a manager that's stealing money, for example, and a board is reviewing financials every month, but then not actually spending their duty of care time to really read and just trusting that the manager is doing what they're supposed to be doing, then the director could potentially carry some of that liability. So having good, strong governance is really important for a good board. So moving forward, as I just wanted to explore a little bit more about what this co-op director responsibility was. As you can see, there's a lot of information here on this particular slide, but I want to focus on this last box here. It's over here. So this last box is hire and supervise, and unfortunately sometimes terminate the general manager or CEO. And so there's a lot of responsibilities, but this is probably the most difficult one that directors tend to find themselves presented with, because if you do have a manager that's not a good fit for your co-op, then you as directors have to make the ultimate decision to terminate that particular employee. And then you have to go through the process of hiring a new manager or CEO as well. And so this is an important role. Not that these other pieces aren't important, but I think it's important to point out this hire and supervise responsibility of the general manager and CEO. So you also need to make sure you're representing, informing, and preserving. This is really an important function of everyone that participates in a cooperative, but I've started spending a little bit of time talking about what would happen if we didn't have cooperatives, especially in the rural parts of Kansas, because of the value that they provide. There's so much value that's provided. They're often the largest employers. They're often the highest taxpayers. And so it's important that as a director, and even as a member of a co-op, you are thinking about the longevity of what your cooperative is going to be providing to the community as well as just to the members too. So I do think it's important to cover that. It's definitely an ongoing process. It doesn't stop. It's continuous, and you think about rotating in new directors. You want to make sure that you're doing good training with your new directors as they come on board, so that you can keep this ongoing process fluid. And a place that we sometimes overlook is this evaluation component. And so I do think it's important that co-ops spend time thinking about how well they're doing as a business. Are they evaluating where they are? Are they looking to the future and thinking about how their business is going to impact the community and what happens if they're not successful. And so there's a lot of business, everyday business that happens at board meetings, but I do think it's important for boards to think a little strategically and think bigger and think about the future and 5 years out and 7 years out instead of just a year out or 6 months out. I also like to share that it's important to be engaged. If you do find yourself serving as a director, demonstrate leadership, make sure the co-op's interests are placed above your own personal interests, make sure you're doing a good job of communicating, and then make sure you're supporting your business. I mean, you own it, you want it to be successful, so make sure you're supporting your business. It's also important to have good cooperative policy. And again, as you guys are thinking about potentially standing up a co-op, these are great things that you can do at the very beginning. So you can actually have good governance in place. You can set good policy from the very beginning and not try to be reactive. So we have co-ops in Kansas that are over 100 years old, and they've really had to flex and ebb and flow as technology has changed and hiring practices have changed. But as you consider potentially exploring a cooperative model, you're really at an advantage because you're able to put these pieces in place at the very beginning that are reflective of today, instead of trying to change policy or create policy when you've been doing something the same way for 70 years or whatever the case may be. I've already talked about how important it is that directors determine what those member benefits are. So I'm not going to touch on this again. Co-op directors also establish and support strategic direction. So what does this look like? They assess the business climate. I mean, you as a producer, if that's your role, are going to be much more in tune with what is happening in the industry of production agriculture. And so just knowing what's coming, and we all have our role in this as well. I mean, we can all participate in this process, but it is important for directors to know, what challenges are coming. What I find interesting when I talk about this with a lot of directors out in the state, they often struggle with, why is this my responsibility? But when you live in, what is a good example? Scott City, Kansas. The population isn't huge. It's a pretty decent small town, but most of the time, the folks that end up finding themselves serving in director roles also sit maybe on the school board or participate with Farm Bureau. And so they are aware of things that are happening. Maybe they're the county commissioner. And so they do have knowledge about what's happening locally. And so I do think that I think bringing that knowledge to the boardroom is important. This is just talking about the value of having a good cooperative strategic plan. The industry as a whole has been talking a lot about strategy because production agriculture continues to change significantly and at a rapid pace. We are utilizing technology to see an increase in yield with a much lower access to resources. So having a good cooperative strategic plan is important. And I also think it's important to know that this can be adaptable. This isn't something that you have to set in place and then this is golden. This is the golden rule. I mean, things change. We could use COVID as a great example. Nobody expected that. That wasn't on anyone's strategic plan. And so everyone had to be adaptable as we went through that process. And I would argue we're still going through that today. And we're still trying to find our footing after what our new normal is, especially in production agriculture. It's changed the market so much. And honestly, even more recently, even though we're a year in, what's happening in Ukraine has heavily impacted production agriculture in Kansas because of how the market has shifted and had to adjust because Ukraine was a huge international player as it related to acres and bushels. So it's important to have a plan, but just know that it's adaptable. What do you want to be as an organization? What do you want your co-op to stand for? And then how can you live that out in the future? I'm gonna run out of time because I'm just barely at half of my slides. So if you'll bear with me, I'm gonna stop my share for just a second and see what I can pull up to use my time most efficiently here. I want to talk about trends. So let me go ahead and start again, and then I'll stop for questions, but I do think it's important to talk about the trends that we are seeing in Kansas. So this is from USDA, NASS, and the Capper Center. And so we started tracking this information in the 50s. And as you can see in Kansas, we had over 350 cooperatives in 1950. These are just in the state. And then the state is a little old and it's actually even less now. Now we're down to, I think we're at 60. The Capper Center only recognizes co-ops that are local, have local headquarters in the state. And so we track that number a little bit differently, but that is a huge reduction in numbers of co-ops in the state. Of the 61, there are only 13 that have 1 or 0 grain locations. And we're continuing to see this change quite a bit. Unfortunately, these are often locations that are targeted for acquisition if they're not financially solvent. And so, but I'm impressed that we still have this many, to be very honest with you. And several of these are very successful co-ops. But the ones that aren't, they're feeling a lot of pressure from their neighbors. And what else I think is really interesting is this data is from 2016. And when I send my presentation, you can see on the bottom, it's really small, but you can go and actually see these maps, and these get updated pretty regularly. But this was pulled from 2016. So the larger dots are all of the locations headquartered in the state. And then the smaller dots are their locations that they own and operate. And so we went from 81 local farmer co-ops to 62, 61. And you can see significantly less headquartered locations, but more storage, to be honest, in Kansas. And so the acquisitions and mergers and consolidation are actually driving more storage opportunities for producers. So you can, if I'm going to just toggle back and forth, you can kind of see some of that growth. We actually have more bushel storage capacity today than we did previously. And we need it because the yields only continue to increase, even given some of the challenges that we face with unpredictable weather, right? That's probably the biggest one. And then cost of fertilizers and inputs. So I wanted to touch this. I thought this was important to share. I'm going to go ahead and stop. I want to make sure I have time for questions. So I'm going to stop my share and see what questions you have about anything as it relates to cooperatives. I know I kind of bounced around a little bit. I just wanted to make sure I got good information in front of you. But what other questions might you have around the structure, around what they do, all the things?
And this is a pretty close-knit group of participants that we have left. So I have actually unlocked the security settings, so you can unmute yourself or bring up your video and ask your question directly to Brandi if you like.
And if you don't have any questions for me, I might have a couple questions for you. I'm really interested in seed to shirt. I want to know about this. I saw this at the very beginning. Can you tell me about this? Tell me about what you're doing with this.
First, I have a question.
Okay,
Then I
go
will
for it.
absolutely do that, of course. Thank you so much for the presentation, Brandi. I have a really good friend named Brandi and spelled the same way, so definitely
That's awesome.
feel that good energy. You mentioned that there are several types. Can a cooperative be similar to a cooperative that kind of does everything, the ag marketing, um, all in one production, that sort of thing? I'm just trying to figure out. It seems like your organization kind of does that, but that's more from a we help other cooperatives do it. But does a cooperative absolutely have to be producer based? Can it be marketing and include other things?
No, that's a great question. So, yes, I mean, you absolutely can have lots of different functionalities within. One of the things that the council is starting to explore, to be honest, is actually looking at our statutes, because Kansas statutes, the best Kansas statute as it relates to cooperative structure is really for farmers. And so if you started a farmer cooperative and you offered other types of cooperative businesses underneath that umbrella, that is probably the best. That's probably the best approach for now. We don't have good statutes in place to allow for. I've had interest over the last several months from two different business sectors. One is childcare, because we have no childcare in Kansas. It doesn't matter where you are. That's a really hard struggle that parents have, is we just don't have good childcare options. And so I've had interest in cooperative childcare. We've seen this successful in a few other states. And to organize an actual childcare cooperative in Kansas right now is very challenging. And I've also had interest in grocery. So I've had a lot of rural areas that have reached out and, hey, we'd really like to start a rural grocery. What does this look like? Our statutes are definitely much more friendly towards producers. But within that business, you could be a grain marketing or a commodity marketing. It doesn't even have to be grain. It could be cotton. I mean, I see your cotton behind you. We have several cotton cooperatives in Kansas, actually, that gin, and then we have another regional cooperative that warehouses cotton. And so you could have a multi-function organization that's organized as a cooperative that provides a service, provides marketing or merchandising opportunities. So yes, the answer is definitely yes. But it is easier right now today to start a cooperative as a producer.
Okay, great. And if someone you guys help organizations do that. So if we are interested in getting that structured correctly, that sort of thing, we would work with your team and of course have what we needed in place, but certainly come to you, and you guys help organizations get structured in the way that is most appropriate for them.
I'd love to help you if you have interest. I provide you with the resources, some tools, and I think where we would be able to provide the biggest benefit is, especially after you get your legal structure in place, we can help you on organizing a good sound policy book, and with your director development, and making sure your governance is, stood up appropriately and that you have success. We want you to be successful.
Yes, ma'am. And you asked, so I'm going to just give the 20-second pitch.
Yes, I want to know more.
So we're a program-focused small batch apparel production company, and we do it in a vertically integrated model. So we work directly with our farmers to source the cotton. Right now, we do that model out of Africa. So we source cotton out of Africa. We produce it at carbon neutral production facility, and then we actually return resources back to the very farmers who we've sourced the cotton from. And we're implementing that same model here in the US. So we're working with African-American cotton farmers to be integrated into our vertical production model. And then we're creating, the desire is to create a model where we can give back to those farmers through resources, farm tools, micro grants, and allow them to reap the benefits of, our sales of our line. As we do that alongside brands and other partners. So
you're already structured like a co-op. That's amazing. I love that.
Trying, right? So it was really helpful for me to take this in, because right now how our farmer enrichment program is supported, it's supported via fiscal sponsorship by our nonprofit, which is great. But if we can create a model that's a little bit more kind of inclusive and all housed within the corporate entity, that's probably more the desired approach. But we are also certified organic cotton brokers, so we create relationships for other brands to be able to source from our farmer groups in Africa and the US. So
Oh, it's fascinating. I've learned a lot about cotton in the last couple of years because Kansas continues to grow more and more acres of cotton. And so I love it. That's fantastic. Actually, we're working on a bill right now in the State House with how to transport it. So, and last year we had some challenges, but we were able to successfully put together a program that would help if we ever had boll weevils introduced in the state, which from what I understand, fortunately, I've never lived that life, but they are just completely and totally damaging and would
disastrous.
destroy. Yeah, horrible,
Yes.
horrible. That's so cool. Well, thank you.
Of course, Brandi. Thank you for the presentation and the information. Very, very valuable and helpful. And
Good.
appreciate your
Yeah,
time.
and if you
this
need
morning.
anything else from me, certainly don't hesitate to reach out.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, guys.
I have a question. I may have missed it, but what about specialty crops in the small farmers? How do we go about creating this cooperative? Has it been done? Have you worked on that? What does it look like?
Great question, Dr. Holmes. Good to see you. We don't have any specialty crop co-ops, but we should, because again, kind of like I was mentioning to Mika, this is a space that's easy to organize in. So really you would just need 5 producers to organize a specialty crop cooperative that's farmer owned. And then you can pool your resources together and you could market your products together. You would get some favorable tax benefits because you were organized as a cooperative. That single taxation is pretty great opportunity to take advantage of. So today we aren't seeing a lot. I haven't seen a new co-op in the ag space developed in Kansas. I can't even tell you. It's been probably 20 years maybe. But it's a great space that's probably the barriers to entry are not nearly as great as they are for if you wanted to come in and put a retail co-op in the state or a childcare or a grocery. So the tools are there. You just you'd have to come together as a cooperative, and then you would have to apply to the Secretary of State's, just like if you were forming an LLC or any other type of business. But you would file as a cooperative.
Perfect. So we need part 2. When will that happen, guys?
Maybe Brian and I could put something together for you guys as next step. So I mean, I'm kind of just trying to, you really tell me what you need. I want to make sure, I kind of, what I did for today was I took Co-ops 101 and I covered a lot of information, but at a very high level. So whatever you guys would like to see next, let me know.
I'll hop in here and just kind of, I guess, kind of probe a little bit as well, because I know what Dr. Holmes touched on it, but our network consists of mainly smaller specialty farmers who, are looking for every and any opportunity. And a lot of farmers that I've talked to are talking about some way to pull resources together. So I guess when you're speaking to us, that's the kind of lens that I'm having. It's looking at it more, how can this relate to our farmers on a less, granular level. And I know I see Steve on, and I think he's one of a handful of our farmers that actually have over 100 acres.
Right.
And so it looks different for us and how we're envisioning. All the information is useful because I assume the structure and the foundation of how the co-op would be formed and those type of things are going to be pretty standard. But I guess what I'm asking for is how would that look for more informative, what you provide for us, how would that look for our farmers, as on that level? And it doesn't sound like this is something that's too common in our state right now, but it's something that I would assume will probably probably pick up with, some of the initiatives that are coming out for, just the food networks in general. So,
Mhm. So tell me what specialty crops, what does that look like?
yeah. So like, for instance, like, food. So I know like, maybe Dr. Holmes can touch on this more
Yeah,
about like,
we have one farmer that's called the tomato lady, and she does 10 acres of tomatoes, and then there's specialty farmers that are doing the herbs and also doing fruits and vegetables and those kind of produce. And so we've even got one, Angela's trying to start hers, which is a lavender farm, but
Oh,
also
cool.
do medicinal lavender. So, and then you've got Justin, who's a small poultry farmer. I have another poultry farmer in Norton. You've got to go meet him. And then another farmer that's coming on board that wants to do goats. And so how do we, okay.
No, I love that. So
Mhm.
I mean, if I can I just kind of, I mean, I have time. If you guys have time, I block 2 hours. So
I
what
have time.
what I personally think you should do is the time is ripe. So you could just form a cooperative. You just need buy-in from some of your producers. It sounds like you have a pretty significant network, and then
Mhm.
you would create whatever your brand needs to look like. And people love to know where their food comes from. And there
Right.
are grocery chains, even if you wanted to stay local within the state, that would love to see your brand. And so maybe if maybe it is a KBFA brand, or maybe you do something different. But I think personally, I think there's several values. The fact that you have Black farmers that are
Yes.
productive in a space that the barrier of entry to production agriculture is so hard. I think that's amazing, and you should be capitalizing on that. I mean, I think
Mhm.
there's so
Mhm.
much value in that story. So you would just come together and organize. And Jonelle, I know I sent you Eric Steinley's contact information, but maybe realistically, Justin, to your point, how do we actually truly move forward next? Maybe we need to have him come and talk about this is the actual step-by-step process to what you need to have to file to become a cooperative. And so you
Yes.
need articles of incorporation, you need to
Mhm.
have bylaws. Who are your initial directors? What are their term limits? Because you have to have all of that, I think, to file with the Secretary of State's office. So maybe that's realistically the next step, is then forming your organization, and then deciding, how are you going to pool your resources? Well, you could pool your resources as production agriculture under this brand, and then you could market to the local grocery stores in the state. I'm trying really hard to get connected with Associated Wholesale Grocers, which is also a co-op. And so I don't have any relationships there right now, but maybe they would be interested. I know Dillon's has, I don't know where they are west of me. Well, I know they're in Hutch, but they
Mhm.
love to source local. I mean, they sell that as part of their marketing. And so then it would be, okay, hey, look, we've got this cooperative. We produce, these are the things that we produce. How can we get this on store shelves, and so that people can see what you're doing?
Well, that's one of the things that we're going to be talking to Cargill about, because they want to get our producers in there, and with the Kroger, and Kroger is,
Yeah,
the
parent.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a
there you
parent for
go, the parent, I
Dillon's.
can't think.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And so looking at that, so maybe, we could look at bringing the people that are interested in being in the cooperative together. And if we, market it like that, and we have a session like that, then you could bring in the key people that would help us, move forward in getting that put together. We have a co-op that I was working. Who was the attorney? And I think he's over in Hutchinson. Is
That was
that Eric?
Eric.
That's
Yep, that was
Eric.
Eric Steinley.
Okay.
Yeah, did you meet him at
Yes.
DDP?
Yes, he
Okay.
found our articles, but he was going to charge me $250 to get them. So I was,
Yeah, he's not cheap.
yeah, yeah. And I was like, okay, hold up until we get really serious about this. So,
I-
maybe I can go ahead and go forward with that.
I do think that, I think the timing is perfect.
We've got to do it now. We've got to do
Yeah,
it.
I do. And I think you get, as producers, there's going to be some benefit that you would get. I mean,
Mhm.
if you were able to market, do you do eggs, Justin, or do you do like do you do layers? Do you actually process chicken? You're muted. He's still muted.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
We have a few layers. We actually are kind of recycling our layers right now, but we do meat. We do meats, and that's more of what we do. So we do a couple of different varieties of the meats, and we're just kind of ramping up our rangers and kind of seeing how they adapt to that climate out there, and so. But yeah, we do not so much eggs. I know that my brother was really upset that we didn't try to ramp up the eggs much, considering, but we just kind of decided to do the meat as we think that there's more of a niche for that. And
How do you sell it today? How do you
so
get it to
more of a CSA model. People kind of reach out to us here late the last couple of years. We just kind of do it by order. And then we keep the rest for our family and distribution amongst, my mom, my brother, sister, and their families. But then, so we have about 50 or to 75 families that we sell to.
That's awesome.
Throughout the season, and it varies what they want and how often they want, but I kind of kept track of that many people about. So.
And we're
That's
also talking to Shop Kansas. They're very interested in getting us on board. But, we've got to be where we can really produce and work together on, because there's one farmer that wants in, he's only got 2.75 acres. But when you're doing lettuce, that's a pretty good haul.
Right.
Yeah.
When you're doing, so we don't want to ignore anyone, no matter how small they are, but collectively, I think we could really do some things. So
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's great when I want to be able to help you in any way that I can. So I do think the next step would be try to see who's truly interested in this type of a model, knowing though that to John Ellis' point, if it blows up, are you going to be ready? Like, do you have capacity for growth? Or so when you think about strategic planning for what you guys would look at, even though you would have, very multifaceted members, what is I would say one of your biggest challenges that you might find is that if people love it and how do you keep up with that growth? Because production agriculture is hard to really manage through that. I mean, that we saw at COVID, you can't turn off cow production. It's not like you can just turn a switch off, and you can't turn off chicken production. I don't know. I'm so ignorant when I don't know how long. What's the life? I don't even know what's from.
Yes. So we keep them for the jumbo white Cornish. We only let go till about 7 weeks at the most. And usually it's around 5 to 6 weeks.
So it's a little bit easier with chickens, I guess.
Yeah, it's a little
gestation
easier.
period's not as long either, right?
Right.
Because from an egg to a chicken, how long does that?
Yeah, that's 6 weeks included.
Oh,
So,
that's with it.
yeah.
Oh, wow.
We get them about 2 days old. This year is the first year we're trying to produce our own from the egg, actually. So, and that's the Rangers. Yeah. So it's only the Rangers, but yeah. So it's not long at all. After this particular variety, they're not recommended to go past 10 weeks. So we kind of found it. Yeah. So.
Well, and even so, thinking about integration and what that could look like, if you had somebody that produced corn, that's a member of your co-op, and you could buy corn from, then you would have the whole supply chain that potentially that you could cover. And again, I think where we fail in the co-op space, it's hard to talk about agriculture to people that are not in it anyway. And living in Kansas, we feel like everybody kind of knows a little bit about agriculture. When you get out of the state, that's definitely not necessarily the truth. But the bigger challenge is, how do you tell the cooperative story? I think this is a place where we really don't do a good job. How do we talk about the value and benefit of pooling resources together? And solving problems together collectively through cooperative business structure. Because I think that's how you can get growth for a producer that doesn't necessarily have that scope to deliver to, if you're part of a co-op under this brand, then you have lots of different places that you can kind of market it out. So I think it's cool. I'm excited. I hope that I can help you guys make it happen.
And I was on the Hill this last week, working on the Farm Bill with several of our legislators, and they've just got to focus on the small farmer and the socially underserved farmer and women farmers. And I really think that that's going to be significant in the legislation this year. If the 2023 Farm Bill goes to the floor for vote.
I love your caveat there. I feel the same exact way. If we actually see it.
Yeah.
if we actually see a Farm Bill happen.
They're up there working like they're going to present something. So I'm hoping that.
I am also hopeful. Well, and one of our pushes has been, we really want to force the legislature to really adhere to this local grown. This is such a silly example, but it's true. So fish sticks is an example in schools, and we don't have a lot of fish farms in Kansas, but there's a couple. I think there's more than one. But right now, the Farm Bill allows that fish that's actually grown. It's maybe grown in Alaska, so it might be grown in the United States, but then it goes to China to get breaded, and then comes back. And so I just wish that we could find ways to just keep our food a little bit closer to home. And I think the co-op model allows us to do that. So because it helps us pool resources together because it's about economy of scale. School district is going to need a lot of food, but it would be hard for one single producer maybe to provide that. But if you had more than one, you had 2 or 3 potentially.
Excellent. Lonnie, do you have to go?
Yes, I do. I have to run to another meeting. This has been awesome though, Brandi. I'll go definitely make edits to the recording so we don't have those issues on the front end too. So I'll keep you posted on that. But I do need to run to another meeting. So
well, it's great to see you. Yeah, you have a great day.
Thanks, Lonnie.
I'll send you the slides. I'll send you and Justin both the slides.
All right, please do.
All right. Thanks, Brandi. We'll be in touch for sure.
Definitely. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day. Have a nice weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye.